All right, folks, welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris, episode 127 or 128, right?
27.
Something like that. All right, so 127. As usual, Barnes will join us soon. I am one half of the show, Rich Baris, the People's Pundit. And let's start off just with this. I think what's going on here, folks, and I'll give you all an update on the public polling project soon. I think what's going on today, there are some overlapping stories, even though they really seemingly have nothing to do with themselves, nothing to do with each other. They really do. Because there's a fracture. I told you this was going to happen. Robert told you this was going to happen. And this really, it was inevitable. These are Marx's internal contradictions. So you can't have a coalition of a million different views and a million different interests, all looking out for number one, without them eventually starting to splinter because they oppose each other at their core. And sometimes political coalitions shift so fast that it takes a lot of people, large percentages of each coalition, to understand what happened or what is happening. And what you're seeing really, take this Jack and Glenn story, all right?
Yes.
So for those of you who don't know, they're lying and saying it's like an intern at USA Today. Originally, there was a staff writer, a staff journalist on the article. But they used the it's an intern thing to make it look like Jack and Glenn Greenwald, Jack Posobiec and Glenn Greenwald were like bullying this poor little intern at USA Today. This poor little intern attached her name to two others and ran a story that was basically meant to bully GoFundMe and crowdsource, right? And crowdfunding. To bully crowdfunding sites in general into disallowing certain people to have funds on their site, to have accounts. In this case, defendants who allegedly committed some wrongdoing, broke some law during the January 6th events, which we're not going to call an insurrection here because that's not the definition of an insurrection. All right. They don't seem to understand. All right. So anyway, people like Glenn Greenwald and Jack, and then others like Mike Tracy, another lefty, by the way, journalist. But it is accurate to call Glenn and Mike independent journalists because they are independent. They don't work for somebody specifically. Jack, of course, works for One America News. So here you have somebody who's, viewed to be on the right, even though I know Jack personally, and I think you'd be surprised by some of the views that we both share. Yes. All right. Media puts everybody in boxes, and that's really not how it works. All right. But in any event, and then you have people, someone like a Glenn, who is decidedly on the left. All right. And they come out and they say, look, you guys are missing a few things here. What you're doing is trying to pretend this is journalism, and you're trying to take away somebody's right to find and be represented by a competent defense. And it's really classical liberalism bumping into this new breed of American fascism that we have been talking about now for a while. I don't even know, a couple months. And I say new breed because it doesn't solely rely on government force. It's a hive mind. The media is a perfect example. And when somebody breaks from the hive, they all come out, butts flailing, stingers ready to take them down. Because you cannot break from the hive mind. It's like an alarm goes off, Dissenter, destroy. In fact, that's why Glenn Greenwald doesn't even work at The Intercept anymore. And an outfit he helped co-found. With his name, he brought readership. With his name, he took readership. So they hate people like him because they're terrified of the prospect that somebody could survive doling out information when they're not of the hive mind. And I think, while I respect a lot of these people, I think they're holding on to something that's not real anymore. This classical liberal view has really been sucked up by the right in this country. Now, maybe Glenn and others like him, I don't mean to say this, but they clearly have a different view on the role of government. So it's maybe that they don't, in earnest belong on the right side, because they don't. But in their fundamental principles now are no longer generally accepted by both sides or all sides, because there's more than two sides now. There really is. So this new hive mind, this new breed of American fascism, they have a problem with some of those fundamental principles, such as the presumption of innocence, due process, the right to a competent defense. See, in their minds, the people charged with some alleged crime on January 6th, they're already guilty. Just like Brett Kavanaugh was already a serial gang rapist before anybody got a chance to hear him out or any of the evidence unfolded. Before it became clear that that woman was seriously disturbed. In fact, they all were. Doctor. She's not a doctor. She needs a doctor.
For sure.
But this is how they sell it, and then they start to believe it in their minds. And you cannot break that truth. Even those fundamental principles don't really matter compared to the story they have told themselves. The hive mind has stamped it. It's approved. That's the story. And there is no dissent from those stories. They're supposed to be champions of equality, but the truth is, those people, they don't believe in equality for them. In fact, anybody who disagrees with them doesn't have the right to due process, doesn't have the right to equal protection under the law, doesn't have a right to a competent defense, and damn sure doesn't have a right to believe what it is they feel they believe. This is why where we are at now is dire. It's more dire than any other time. It really is, because there never was a time where we were like disagreeing on fundamental principles. And at this point, not only do we not agree, but some of them have taken those fundamental principles and trampled them so badly, they use them as political weapons. So not only do you not have a right to due process, we're going to commit lawfare. This is like the era of witch hunts. And cancel culture is just another extension of that. It's an attempt to shut it down without a proper debate and without somebody being afforded the right that they go on, masquerading they believe in. But the truth is they don't. One of the great injustices in this society, too, in our justice system, is that we're all supposed to have a right to a competent defense, but in truth, some can buy a much better defense than others. It doesn't make them any more or any less of a criminal. It just so happens to be their station. They can't afford it. They can't afford Michael Jackson's lawyers. Right? Mm-hmm. This is the way it is. This is why Robert, by the way, who will be joining us soon, this is why Robert does some of the work that he does. Robert got, I'll tell you what, I remember Robert on TV in Ocala, Florida. I'm not even kidding.
I know.
Defending Wesley Snipes.
We were watching
Wesley
it.
Snipes had the financial ability to obtain Robert and get a vigorous defense. And because he did, he avoided jail time that most of us were absolutely going to get if we were Wesley Snipes. That is why Robert does what he does with some of these cases, because he knows that's true. That's just true. And here you have these people who pretend they are champions against inequality. And what they are essentially doing is denying the non-privileged class. They are denying and seeking to deny them the ability to raise enough money to get a competent defense. And they are using bullying tactics to do it. Media's role is not to bully private companies into doing whatever it is. And that their argument's ridiculous. Well, have already taken strong stances against extremists. Alleged extremists. Alleged criminals. That's why we have a judge and jury. The media is not the police force, the judge, the jury, and the executioner, in the old saying. Mm-hmm. But they sure as hell want to be. Because they don't believe in the things that even this old breed of liberal believes in. And I think the old liberal, and I don't mean it in age, I mean in the vernacular, I'm trying, they don't believe in what you believe in. And sometimes it takes time for these coalition shifts to go down. Some get left behind. Some don't realize what has happened until much later. Some see it right away. But in this case, I think what we're really seeing is fracture. Complete fracture. Now, they don't want to talk about that. They want to keep telling you Biden's approval rate is 65% and the most popular president ever. Yeah, next week he'll be at 70. Don't.
I'm waiting for.
We'll talk about the public polling project soon, by the way. But the bottom line is that without their enemy to glue them together, they're going to come apart. Because there is nothing else that holds them together. They had one singular common goal. Hate. That's it. Of one person specifically who represented all the things that they felt did them wrong in their life, or all the things that jeopardized their station, because they are the privileged. In the vast majority of cases, they are the privileged. And they were afraid. It's really fear and hate. Mm-hmm. They were afraid that this man and his movement would upset that. Would take that away from them. Like I told you all the time. If life is a game of 9-ball, these people need the 6 in everything. Look at what they just did to Glenn. And trying to do with Jack. Look what they just did. They were literally bullying the hell out of private corporations in an effort to deny citizens their due process rights. But then when they got criticized for it, they accused them of bullying. In a sexist way, too. It's unbelievable.
That's the only way.
And they flatly ignored the staff writer on the byline and pretended like it was just some intern who was trying to do her best. How dare you, brutal man in Brazil. You horrible, horrible man. This is pathetic. It's a joke. They need a life vest all the time, man. They need a life vest all the time. This is why I tell you they really need that, because they can't do this on an equal footing.
Or principle.
They're not.
That's the problem.
Right, because there's no principle, so they have no compass. They need the numbers to stack in their favor. Because they have no guiding star. You see, so when something like this happens, they don't really know how to make a coherent, consistent argument in their favor, because their arguments are not consistent. I just laid out how they're not. You're supposed to be the champion of the weaker and downtrodden, right? That is what you would describe yourself as. The morally superior champion of the downtrodden. Yet here you are, perfectly okay with Peter Strzok and all the other people, by the way, who are disgraced federal officials. Disgraced federal officials. Raising ridiculous amounts of money they're never going to need for a legal defense, because they're not going to be prosecuted. Did anybody ask Andy where all that money went? Doesn't anybody care where Peter Strzok's, where did that money go? Do you really think he spent that? He was not prosecuted, folks. Andy was not prosecuted. His lawyer's retainer was a bill and a half.
Where's that money?
Where's that money? Nobody cares. Nobody asks that question. Who they care about are the people they don't really care about station. They don't care about downtrodden. They don't care about any of that. All they care about is that they don't agree with these people. They don't like these people. And therefore, these people do not or are not afforded equal protections under the law. This is going to continue. Both is going to continue. One, they will continue to make these assaults because that's that new breed of American fascism. They don't need government. Not yet, anyway. It's a hive mind. Everybody's basically punked into the same mentality. And they will use the media and other information flows to bully people into submission. And I am willing to bet. Well, I'm not a betting man, but don't be surprised. Let me put it like that. Robert's the betting man.
Yes, he is. I'll
make the odds, but I'm just not going to bet on them. Basically, GoFundMe, this will be next. This will be next. Believe me, if they can do what they're doing in the U.S. military right now, targeting certain viewpoints, while ignoring and refusing to enforce violations of their new extremism training. We can get into that more too.
That's going to be fun.
I got some good stuff on that. They will refuse to enforce that if there are certain viewpoints. If you think for a second they won't bully an already liberal company, tech company, you're fooling yourself. They can bully the military into it. They'll easily bully these chumps. In fact, that's why we didn't want to raise money on GoFundMe for the public polling project. This is why. We knew we'd run into just this hate and vitriol. Mm-hmm. Quick update on it. We are almost a full third of the way to April. And I mean April, meaning the end of April. All right. At this rate, we will have a public poll every month if this continues. Mm-hmm. All right. Telling you those weekend responses really do matter. But we're going for a very nice, large sample. And we will have some results to share with you by the end of the week, generally speaking. Gun control, immigration, COVID, Joe Biden. A lot about Joe Biden. Kamala Harris's favorability ratings, transgender participation in sports. Only I took it a little further. And I tweeted a little
message.
Yeah, like a little
teaser.
A teaser.
Mm-hmm.
America, are we really okay? You're so morally superior. Are we really ready to watch a man beat a woman's face in? A woman who thinks she's a man? Are we really ready? I don't think so. And so when you ask that question a little bit differently, wait a minute, they're going to be in you think they're going to box together too? You think why not? Hell, call Dana White. Dana, you sexist, misogynist man. You know? Why don't you let men beat on women, Dana? God. Let's bring in Robert. On that note. Hey, Robert, can you hear me, my friend? I can hear him on your end.
I can hear him.
You can hear him? I can't hear him. What's going on here? Oh, no. Let me try this again. All right, how about now, Robert? Oh, there we go. There we go. All right, let's bring on Robert. She had you. I didn't. I had to click on something else. Listen, I don't know. I took on like 10 things on the beginning here, starting with Glenn and what's going on with Glenn and Jack, and then even Mike Tracy jumping into the mix, all the way into some of the questions on the public polling project, which is going to, this survey is going to, I mean, I've been reading this survey over the weekend before going out, and I'm like, this is going to piss some people off. Some of this, like, we ask questions people just don't ask. Mm-hmm.
I can't.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Why don't? Yeah, we just ask people questions, that they don't see on public polling surveys. And the way we asked it, Robert, which is like, oh my God, I can't believe he just said this. Oh my God, I can't believe he. If I was taking a survey, I would want to know what news outlet had the courage to do this. Had the galls to do this. I would be like, good for them. But I just don't think everyone's gonna see it that way. I don't think everyone's gonna see it that way. Well, first off, what do you think about this this USA Today nonsense, Robert?
Well, I mean, they started with Rittenhouse. They did everything possible to prevent Rittenhouse from being able to mount a defense by shutting off platform after platform after platform after platform. And so they just decided to extend it to everybody on the Capitol Hill cases, because as long as many of them don't have are in economically distressed positions, do not have the means to afford a meaningful defense, and the federal public defenders who are available to them, some are doing a pretty good job, but all of them politically disagree with them. So the confidence you can have in them is going to be constricted and limited. Also, they're just not going to understand some of their perspectives and issues just because of their political profiles. And so that's why their obsession was to redo what they did with Rittenhouse and prevent them from being able to mount a defense. And they've been very vocal and verbal about this, sort of guilt by association. Any lawyer who appears to defend them can expect to get attacked and in the court of public opinion and in the professional circles. So they had a case they thought was rigged. They thought all these cases were rigged because the press was on their side, on the prosecutor's side. The prosecutors were so overt that they're going on 60 Minutes bragging about how they were going to basically screw these people over. And judges, including the chief judge of D.C., was being very verbal and vocal about how that judge approached the matter. And the D.C. Circuit had to step in because they overstepped their bounds on 60 Minutes. And so it agitates them that they're getting a defense. And it's where this world, these are people who believe these are not your 1960s William Kunstler liberals. Harry Littman was on Twitter today saying these vaccine passports will be great because it will smoke out the last group of dissidents so that they can't even go to an entertaining venue without getting this, and they'll be denied. That's your civil liberties liberal lawyer. ACLU has been almost entirely silent on what's happened to the people on Capitol Hill cases, as they've gone overtly partisan in their politics. And so these are not 1960s Kunstler types. These are 1930s statist Soviet East German. The closest to the 1960s would be the show trials in Cuba. That's how these people think. They think they shouldn't get a defense. They should just get the appearance of a defense, the impression of a defense, but not a real defense. And then they should just be hung and strung up. And that's the political motivation of these kind of prosecutors and lawyers and increasingly jurists and the press in this context. But it was astounding that she expected that USA Today writer, I guess is an intern, expected a lot of social acclaim by saying, look at what I'm doing and look at what we're doing to stop these people from even being able to afford a defense. And Greenwald just pointed out how absurd that was and how morally horrendous that was if you care about constitutional liberties. And then, of course, they accuse him and Posobiec of being the bullies. The bully. The press with the big platform with 1 million plus newspapers distributed. That's not a bully. Trying to deny poor people a chance to defend themselves. That's not being a bully. Glenn Greenwald pointing it out is being a bully. That's the gaslighting echo chamber world in which they reside. But it is a disturbing tendency within the legal profession and the press writ large to weaponize every tool of power to suppress civil liberties and constitutional rights in the current era.
And I think that is what makes the current era different. And I was trying to make that case before. I really don't think, Robert, we have had, we had a civil war in this country. We have had division in this country before. But what we haven't had is a difference on, like a break on certain fundamentals, right? So we always agreed on the very basics of what this government was supposed to be about, and what we never had the privileged class of people. And of course, it's what I said, it's one of the great injustices in the society, in the justice system. We're all supposed to be afforded a competent defense, right? We're all supposed to have due process. But the truth of the matter is, privilege and money buys a better defense. I mean, that is just the plain truth. And these are the people who are supposed to be champions of the downtrodden, champions of those who are less fortunate, and that, just generally not privileged. But it really doesn't matter if you disagree with them. And it's not a disagreement on, what, I think there should be this policy. Well, I do too, but I think the best way to go about it is like the argument over healthcare. What's the best way to insure the most people, right? And the right would say, well, the government cannot do it as well as the private sector. And that was a very textbook American debate. Modern American debate. This is different, man. This is, I disagree with them, so they don't deserve due process. And I disagree with them on something like that, right? So the competent defense, your right to a defense, no, not for you, because whoa. And the truth is, has been going on now for a while. The media just runs a really good cover game. Brett Kavanaugh was not afforded the presumption of innocence. Is some woman with extreme questions about her past, mental health, instability, her own dad, for crying out loud, has to go up to Brett Kavanaugh's father and apologize. And this is the woman they present to the country as a doctor and a credible witness to make us believe somehow a judge who is a pillar of his community and sits on the Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia was somehow a serial gang rapist for decades and nobody knew. I mean, this is nuts, man. I mean, nuts. And then, of course, they just put anybody up to help corroborate Ford. And it didn't matter if it was peddled by, slip and fall scumballs like Mike, who you warned everybody about. You told me that before he was even a big name, before Brian Stelter started wetting his pants and putting him on CNN every night. You were like, this guy's a dirtbag. He doesn't pay his employees. He's a world-class piece of crap. And everybody was like smitten by this guy. He brings forward a complete case of a client. I don't mean a case like the legal case. I mean a mental case. He brings forward a complete case of a woman for a client and to corroborate the stuff against Kavanaugh. And really the same goes with Donald Trump. They fabricated Robert, they told the country the president of the United States was a traitor. They got a special counsel. This is new. This is new crap, guys, is what I'm trying to say. This is above and beyond what we have seen in the past. Even, you could find lawfare going back to FDR. He really liked to use the levers of government and power against his political opponents. We think of him as our beloved father during World War II. The guy was a piece of trash, all right? I hate to tell everybody. He fully understood eventually the Japanese were going to have to do something because of the metal and oil embargoes. This is not a guy we should be heralding either, but even people we just never stepped over this line before, man. We have never stepped over this line before. And where you have others actively seek to oppress and because they don't believe in those principles. That's what it really is. They don't believe in them. They just use them in arguments, like we see with the Floyd case and so many others, right? We see them use this rhetoric, but they don't actually believe it. Because if they did, they would know this is so radically over the line. It doesn't matter you disagree with somebody. There's still the presumption of innocence. They don't believe in the presumption of innocence. It's very clear. And we have political coalitions that shift so quickly. It happens all the time. Certain people get left behind. They get left like in the dust, and they don't realize. It takes some time to realize that their party or their ideology is no longer the same. And what you described before is really like you have these new, some of them are Marxists, yeah. They're very, very similar to Marx. And that's new breed of fascism. And that's the new energy. And these classical liberals are finding themselves in these debates with these people, and I don't think they understand. They don't believe that stuff. You know, you're arguing things that they are dismissing. They're fundamental to you, but they were not raised or taught the importance of it for everyone. They were raised and taught that there were certain people who were oppressed before. Now we need to get them equality, but that comes at the expense of those who you may think oppressed them before or would deny them that equality. So they're now less than human and less than a citizen, and they don't get it. And I really think there's a lot of these, lefties out there that are old school lefties, and I don't think they've realized how badly this isn't what they represent. It's just not.
Well, I mean, it's very there's the new neoliberal class, neo-fascist class is that they're statist. They believe in the state, and they'll always come up. They'll always be looking for new excuses.
That's right.
To arrogate power to the state, and they'll never say they're doing it in the name of the powerful. They'll always say they're doing it in the name of the weak and the unprotected. And thus they have to create constant, continuous new classes of victims and new means of victimology in order to justify giving themselves more power. And it's always, it's going to be the name of making sure poor people have health care, making sure minorities are protected from hatred, making sure women have equal opportunity, whatever group of new victims they can create that need the state to be able to be quote unquote safe will be who they pitch and promote and propagate. And it'll be the narrations that they have to tell. And anything that counters that, anything that contradicts that, has to be quashed and crushed, whether it's speech, whether it's access to the ballot, whether it's access to office, whether it's protesters going amok at Capitol Hill. And, one group of protesters treated one way, another group of protesters treated a completely different way, even when BLM, even when Antifa are much more violent, much more deliberately violent, much more intentionally violent, much more consistently and continuously violent than anybody than the group of people that got caught up in the Capitol Hill riots on January the 6th. But you see wide and wild disparities and discrepancies in our two-tiered system of justice. Because for one, it's all about the ends and the means don't separate from each other anymore. Whatever means are necessary. They don't believe in the rule of law. They don't believe in constitutional restraint. They don't really believe in democracy. I mean, I learned that as a young student at law school when I was the law student representative in the Teaching Assistants Association Union during a potential strike with the University of Wisconsin. And they almost all the union representatives of the grad students were more obsessed with these politically correct causes than they were actually putting more money in the pockets of graduate teaching assistants. And I remember sitting there saying, shouldn't we be focused on what's good for the most people as they measure it? And they looked at me like I was from Mars. They're like, no. We must stand up for the righteous cause, whatever that is. And in this case, they were advocating in particular, they're obsessed with virtue signaling for immigrant teaching assistants, which was ironic because most of the immigrant teaching assistants refused to join the union and had no interest in it. It's like, why are you focusing on these people? I don't know. But it was part of their showing their moral superiority and for the cause. Yeah. And for people to understand the mindset of this, they really need to go back and study the 30s and 40s and 50s, the communist movement. That's going to be your closest analogy to how these people think. Communists had no problem breaking rules, selective interpretation of rules, selective enforcement of rules, selective violence, political martyrdom of various kinds of various causes or individuals and set up on bogus grounds. They didn't believe in the Constitution. They saw constitutional liberals as the hurdle. They saw them as the thing holding back the revolution was these compromised reformers. That's why the first people usually whacked after the successful revolution were the liberals. I mean, same thing happened in Cuba. They all thought that China. Papa Fidel was on their side. Wait, surprise, surprise.
Same, yeah.
It's like Cienfuegos. He took a little plane. I mean, he was part of the revolution, but he was more on the old school left side than the communist left side because Castro hid his communist beliefs all the way through the revolution. Indeed, he hid them for several years after he took power, while they slowly got rid of the wrong people. And Cienfuegos took a plane, and it was a plane that never landed. And Castro's still got
Right.
Castro's dead, but Raul's still alive. They got Cienfuegos stuff all over Cuba, and you don't have to talk to a Cuban long for them to say Castro killed him. Everybody kind of knows. Yeah, so it's a barely hidden secret in Cuba, but that's why the left
so
that dallies with these people, the Andrew Sullivans of the world, that say I was right about Trump, and now he's like, oh man, what's this new craziness that I've helped unleash? It's just a mistake that all these people made that they'll continue to pay the price for. Though there was good pushback in the courts last week, where a professor won, an evangelical Christian professor, small college that he helped build, that for working class students was the idea. They were trying to run him off because he wouldn't refer to he wouldn't refer to a man as a woman because the man wanted to be called a woman. And but he tried to accommodate him. He didn't insult him, didn't isolate him, nothing else. He just called him by his last name, tried to accommodate him. That wasn't good enough for the new woke administration. So they're trying to run him off. He sued, and the Sixth Circuit said he has free speech, and that they have to pay him damages for what they did to him. So that was a very good ruling, and I think there'll be more rulings like that as more pushback occurs to this insanity. But we face a new statist left that's a combination of a statist left and a neo-fascist, neoliberal world. Bezos is not interested in redistribution of wealth, not his wealth at least.
Right.
But he is definitely interested in combining with the state to arrogate more power and profit. I mean, look at how fabulously money-making the lockdowns have been for these tech billionaires. They have made billions and billions and billions thanks to this. They would love this to keep going. It's where they and Bill Gates are on the same team. Gates is in it for power reasons. They're in it for money reasons. But Zuckerberg has made billions. Bezos has made billions. Bezos is on his way to being the first trillionaire, given the where direction he's going in. So we face a sort of corporate neo-fascist mindset that has a very statist Soviet-style approach amongst its functionaries. Bureaucrats that will always be looking for new excuses to give themselves more power. And that's the greatest adversary that, whether you're libertarian or populist or individualist or small business oriented, you all share the same threat and the same risk.
And this is why, to tie populism into all of this, this is why, and you can say what you want about Donald Trump, but really the message was the map changer for Republicans. And we were just going over Pennsylvania, the registration changes in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, how hard it was to even, forget about winning it in 2016, how hard demographically it was to even get within 2 points. I mean, and without somebody like Donald Trump on the ticket, this is going to be back to the Romney map, or worse. It will be worse than the Romney map, actually, for Republicans, because there needs to be an overlap between those ideologies. So there's going to be a lot of people who say, there has to be somebody who's there looking out for the little guy. You can't just laissez-faire. That America's gone. The Adam Smith America is gone, or at least it is right now. That there has to be somebody looking out for the little guy, but I don't want it done at the expense of we have to accept this, the cancel culture, the new, neo-fascist, kind of neoliberal fascist, whatever you want to call it. That's not their ideal answer. But if it's going to be the only one making those arguments, there's a danger there. And Republicans really have no electoral path if they don't offer something that still addresses those concerns. And for people, I try to explain this to people, I always try to tell them about unions, right? So, yeah, you don't like unions? At one point, there was a problem. Only one side offered a solution to that problem. And that is, there we have it. Now you have unions, and there's union busting. Well, we don't need them like we did before. Basically, it's really goes to, I say this all the time. You cannot win if you don't play the game. You cannot win this argument if you don't even try to make one or exist or recognize the existence of these injustices and these double standards. Like the Mitch McConnells of the world would just love to just continue to go through life and pretend like they're not there. But somebody like a Donald Trump came along, spoke to them, and he was able to bridge that certain divide. That's why he did win those states, Robert. I mean, that's it. That's why he did take Bernie's coalition from 2016 and put them in his own primary totals during the primaries while Bernie went down because he was missing his coalition. And without those people, then you're going to leave this side, to this new thing that's creeping up that even classical liberals can't jive with. You're going to leave them as the only one making the arguments that sound, like you said, they'll use that rhetoric all the time. They're not going to say, I'm for the, this is all going to benefit the Bezoses of the world. They're not going to say that. But if they're the only ones making that, for the little guy argument, the people will buy it. This is the lesson of history over and over. The Tsar in Russia, the family, period, ignored those grievances. And that's what, and maybe they didn't want a revolution too radical for Trotsky, but they got it because that was the only one making a case, right? And the list goes on and on and on. I'm sure they didn't want the Cultural Revolution either in China. They weren't expecting all of that to come with but he was the only one making the case. And really, I mean, when we talk about these dictators, these 20th century statist governments, the story plays out the same. You get a complacent or a complacent party, whatever it may be, a complacent party, a complacent government, a complacent monarchy, and they just ignore people. Yeah. And until somebody comes along, sounds really great, ends up crazy, of course, and the telltale signs are always there, and those telltale signs are very selective and arbitrary applications of the law, selective and arbitrary protections of rights for certain groups, right? But nobody cares about that at the time when it's happening. All they care about is their grievance, and nobody recognizes it until it's just too damn late, man. It's too day late and a dollar short. That's it.
I think
a million lives short.
Yeah.
That's how
there's no question the future of republicanism is Trumpist in nature. The question is how much Trump will be integral himself to that. And I think
let's talk about that.
Got a lot of blowback. Well, not a lot, but some blowback from the Trump loyalist circles about last week's show, because it's good to have a loyal coterie of folks who are loyal to you. In Trump's case, no matter what, but there's a weakness to it. It's not always, in my view, the most effective form of loyalty. And we went through this throughout the whole 4 years of Trump, where you had the Bill Mitchells of the world say that everything that was happening was great. So what Sessions was doing was great. What Huber was doing was great. What Durham was doing was great. What Bill Barr was doing was great. What Pompeo was doing was great. What everybody was all part of a secret Trump plan that you could not second guess Trump. That if Trump got suckered into bombing Syria, no, he didn't get suckered. He was playing whatever degree chess. If he kept hiring idiot after idiot after idiot. Oh, no, he wasn't hiring those idiots. They're secretly on his side. I mean, we found out last week another example. And my view is the only way plenty of people in Trump world watch this show, and the only way Trump frankly learns is by getting smacked in the face. This is reality. If you've studied him long enough, figured this out. And the second problem that in Trump world that's becoming more and more apparent is what we talked about last week, which is too few advisors that are Trumpists. What people underappreciate about Trump is, despite Trump's own mythology, I myself figured everything out. I myself ran the greatest campaign. I mean, his ego, God, it can help him in certain circumstances. It doesn't in this set of circumstances. Trump did well because he had Sam Nunberg and Roger Stone and Corey Lewandowski and Steve Bannon and a bunch of people close to his circle giving him information. They were his intelligence operators. And when he was getting very good, now he has great instincts. And people pointed out, well, he went on to some TV shows and did very well. If Tucker's covering it, Trump's instincts will be fantastic. They always are. The problem is when Trump doesn't know about it. The reason why Trump did a poor answer on the critical race theory question that Chris Wallace misportrayed in the debate is because Trump only knew what Tucker had talked about. So he only knew a tiny bit of the topic. Had he known the topic effectively, he could have called out Wallace right on the spot. This was he managed in both debates to almost never bring up war and almost never bring up trade, his two big winning issues in those key Midwestern constituencies. So, when people tell me Trump is perfect, if he was perfect, he'd be president right now, not ex-president. He's ex-president because he has a flaw, and that flaw is surrounding himself with incompetent people, sometimes out of his own ego, sometimes out of just bad instincts when it comes to people. I hire the best people. No, Trump hired some of the worst. That's the biggest failure of Trump. His 4 years was horrible hiring. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just listen to Donald Trump. His own people. He says, man, that guy was an idiot. That guy was an idiot. That guy was an idiot. And I was like, the only thing they have in common is somebody put him in charge, Trump. So he needs to hear more of that criticism because, frankly, he didn't hear enough of it in his 4 years. It's why he lost, because he did. And he's got some of those same people around him now. And an example of that, so that's a response to all the people that were critical. And then some people were sending trolls into my Twitter feed constantly. So I started blocking them. So it's nothing to you personally if I blocked you. It's just if you keep sending trolls into my Twitter feed. I don't need the sideshow. But that's a problem, is people not fully appreciating that Trump has a potential Achilles heel of an issue of who he surrounds himself with, and he has not fixed it at all. He has a couple of good people now. Some bad people are out, but some people that are really bad are still critical. I'll give an example. Last week, I was on a major call involving a very sophisticated legal effort to fight back against H.R. 1. Coordinating strategy with a whole bunch of people, including some very high-ranking people. You know who was nowhere on the phone? You know who didn't have a single person on the phone? Trump. Yeah. Trump was paying no attention at all. A huge missed opportunity is Trump could have made sure the Georgia law, like the Georgia law is a neutered law. Is it an improvement over what used to be?
That's right.
Yes. But the big issues were they going to enforce signature matches, and were they going to end this no excuse mail-in balloting? They backed out of both. Why did they back out of both? Because the only pushback they were getting was from Stacey Abrams. Trump was nowhere to be found. He was busy calling in on some Saturday Fox show. So, Trump still thinks that some of his methods were what made him successful in 2016, not realizing it was also the substance, that he was ahead of the curve on immigration. Yeah. He was ahead of the curve on politicized Islam. He was ahead of the curve. Now, he was instinctually always been ahead of the curve on trade and war, but he was ahead of the curve on Common Core, on education. Does anybody think Trump would, today Trump wouldn't know what that is? It was because people were feeding him what, Michael Savage and Alex Jones and Laura Ingraham when she was a radio host and all of them were saying. He wasn't just paying attention to Fox. If anything, he paid very little attention to Fox in the lead up to 2016. And that's why he was ahead. That's why when people heard him, they're like, wow, this guy's saying, because people Trump came in with the highest negatives of any person in history to try to run for president. He had including within the Republican Party. He started at 3% in the polls. So any image that, hey, it's because Trump was a great businessman. Trump didn't have, people were deeply skeptical within the Republican Party of Trump. Oh, yes. He kept saying exactly what they were thinking, and he was the first one to say it, and they were like, holy cow. And then they realized he had no fear whatsoever, was willing to mock John McCain about being a POW. Now, it was kind of a joke, but it was kind of a funny joke. I do like the joke just better when they're not caught. And I like them better when they're not caught and they confess and they attack America, just in case you forget how Johnny Boy folded fast. They're like, wow, this guy, and he understood great instincts, genius persuader, but that only worked because he was tuned in to what the base was saying by ignoring the Wall Street Journal, by ignoring the New York Times, by ignoring Fox News, because Fox News was trying to pitch a conciliatory approach on immigration. It's just one example.
Yeah, they were running interference, Robert, on him. That's what they were actively running interference on Donald Trump. And people better listen to what Robert's saying right now, because he's hitting the nail on the head. I polled the whole damn primary. I polled the general election. I saw what was going on, and it's exactly what Robert said. They were skeptical. They didn't even like him. I'm talking about Republicans. But every time he said something and dropped the bomb when it was politicizing Islam. He would say something that not just Republicans, but average Americans think.
Working class
And
Catholic independents in the North that he understood very, very well from his days in New York. And it was to those two groups he helped hammer. And once he lost Bannon, he started to lose part of his touch, but he used social media to stay in touch. Now he's not on social media. And we're seeing signs of it. And the biggest blown opportunity is he should be leading the fight against H.R. 1. He should, like Steve Bannon's talking about him running and being Speaker of the House. That's never going to happen. Trump's not even paying attention to the legislation that's before Congress right now. So, I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's just that, people's idealism of Trump doesn't match up the reality right now because he's still very much in his own bubble. And he has a bunch of people around him that have no interest in promoting Trumpism. He almost endorsed the Ohio Senate candidate that apparently met with her and Mandel last week, though I'm not sure what the wisdom of that is. I kind of get the idea you're going to do a reality game, The Apprentice, to see who wins Trump's a nomination. It kind of diminishes it, to be honest with you.
Robert, I've been saying this all the whole time. I told as many people as I could tell, you're diluting this. You're diluting it badly. And I got a call from somebody on Team Mandel last week. They were afraid that they didn't get it. I'll just tell you right now.
Which would be insane. Because for people who don't know, the person he's thinking about endorsing, also J.D. Vance is likely to run. And J.D. Vance is a game changer. But notice Vance's approach. Vance didn't even go down there. Vance didn't beg to go down there, nothing else. Vance is going to run on his own ticket, going to run. If he's going to run, he's going to do his own thing. He's not going to be conciliatory to anybody. And he'll try to say, and I think, frankly, that's a smarter strategy. I mean, you would like to have Trump's endorsement, but when he has idiots choosing that, well, just move on from it. Because the person he's talking about, thinking about endorsing is the person who supported the congressman who impeached him, voted for impeachment, even after he voted for the impeachment. And she's like, well, later I corrected that. Why does Trump even contemplate such a person? What a crock. So, the other thing is, it appears to me right now, he's 90% focused on getting back at the people who voted on impeachment. And he's 10% focused on building a populist lasting coalition. And I don't see the policy component. Like I said, he didn't have anybody there helping out on H.R. 1. Was a no-show in Georgia at key junctures, has been a no-show in every single state on these election law reforms. How does he think he's going to suddenly win if he thinks about running in 2024 if he's not helping to fix the laws now?
He's not been around.
This is the same mistake that got him into this trouble in the first place. We'll see. So that's my pushback on the people who are like, oh, don't be critical of Trump. That means you're a traitor. That doesn't mean that. The only way Trump becomes the best Trump, I see Trump as a vehicle for populism. Trump is not the be-all and end-all for me. Trump is only useful to the degree he's an effective vehicle for populism. Once he's not, God bless, wish him well, but I could care less. He's not. It's not Trump or die. And if people have that mindset, what are they going to do when Trump's out of office? I mean, even let's say he runs in 2020, he's gone in 2028. Then what? I mean, we got to build a populist movement of which Trump can be a key component, and who still is the best instinctual populist on the public stage. But by no means is it live or die with Trump, because that's a problem for populist success.
It can't be. And I think Democrats figured that out with Barack Obama. So it cannot be Obama or nothing, right? So they tried with Hillary. Obama actually liked Hillary a lot better. For people who don't know, he did. He likes her way more than he liked Joe Biden. He thinks Joe is dumb. At least Hillary, he thinks, is smart. And
that's why Joe Biden keeps calling himself vice president. He was like that character in Game of Thrones that got tortured, that he made him call himself Ree or whatever it was. Basically, that's who Joe Biden was. He's been Ree while he was under Obama, and you can still see it's in the back of his mind constantly. Now that's the second question is another example of areas where I have doubts of where Trump is going. I don't understand. I kind of understand, but if Laura Trump's going to run for the Senate, North Carolina, to go to Fox, but that tells you that I was
going next.
That's where that shows Trump had no alternative media plan, like he was talking about. He just either abandoned it or whatever, because the goal would be to take all the Trumps together to the new network: Laura Trump, Donald Jr., and Trump himself. to help either to monetize that net, brand it, whatever it was, create a relationship with that network. If Laura Trump is going back to Fox, and Trump himself has more often been on Fox than any other network, then it's like, okay, so I guess the old Ailes plan of recreating your own cable network or rebranding it, I guess Trump TV is not happening, is how I read that. No way Laura Trump goes to Fox if there's any plans on Trump TV. The second component is, I thought it'd be a good idea for him to create brand associations with existing alternative social media platforms, not try to create his own. Trump has no success with that, and I was a little unsettled by seeing that too. Dave Rubin put it very diplomatically, and he was like, hey, we welcome the competition because of locals and whatnot. And you have Richard's over at Locals. I'm at Locals at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. But I could see him branding something like that, and that'd be fantastic. Trying to build his own from scratch, that sounds like somebody's grifting him. Somebody's convinced him, Trump. Yeah, you can get back at Facebook. You can take him out. You can get back at Twitter. You can get back at Google and YouTube. You'll create the greatest Trump platform ever. First of all, it's very hard. Secondly, it's very costly. Third, it's very time-consuming. Fourth, Trump will be the biggest target in history. If they won't let him on social media platforms, what do you think they're going to do to his social media platform? So assuming it even gets off the ground anywhere. So I'm monetizing his brand to attach it made sense. Trying to start from scratch your own platform does not make any sense to me, unless he's going to pour $100 million into it. And if anybody knows Trump, he doesn't like to spend money. So I don't. Maybe they've got some other people on the hook who are saying they're willing to invest if it's Trump's name. But then why not go to an existing one? Use a Locals, a Parler, a Gab. There's a MeWe, a Rumble. There's people who have been doing this now for 5 to 10 years who've developed viable alternative platforms that independent of YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Google, including DuckDuckGo and others on the search engine side. Go there. Don't start from scratch. Don't start from new, because it's unlikely that's ever going to take off. And here too, Trump, when he brands outside projects, highly successful. When Trump tries to start his own business outside of real estate, he's almost always been a failure. I mean, that's just reality. Trump the game, gone. Trump the airplane, gone. Trump the university, gone. A bunch of other Trump projects outside of branding, like celebrity reality TV, and outside of real estate, which he understands because he literally grew up in it from the time he was 5 years old. In New York, the capital of real estate for the world. Outside of those two spaces, he has no history of continuous success in developing new businesses unless it's his brand that he's monetizing. So this strikes me as and more signs that he's still in the same bubble that's going to limit his effectiveness. Doesn't mean he's still not one of the best populists on the national stage. Doesn't mean there's anybody that's better than him on the national stage. There isn't in either capacity. But it does mean he has the same weaknesses that led to his defeat in 2020.
Yeah, I'd say it's very clear. I get this like one of my number one questions, who could take over for Trump? And DeSantis, very popular Republican governor. The St. Leo poll is a joke. I'll just tell you that right now. DeSantis is not beatable right now. He's not beatable in Florida. So I don't care what that poll says. They thought Joe Biden was going to carry the state of Florida. Let's not forget they caved in the end on both DeSantis and Rick Scott in 2018. They had it right like 3 days before the election. But because they were the only ones showing a lead for either one, they decided to go with +5 Democrat across the board, and they were completely wrong, which really caused me to lose all respect for them, because I'm familiar with them. I've known them for years, being down there, and that was like a sad day for us.
Well, speaking of sad days,
we knew what they did.
Did you see Nate the Snake Silver in sackcloth last week? Guess who he had to admit had the. Now, he still won't include your polling in the data, but putting that aside, guess who he had to admit otherwise had the best polling results? And he said it even on Twitter. He said, it turns out the Trafalgar group that I tried to ban from my site and say fake polling had the best polling results.
Well,
so
the
you
best
knew that
on
had to
what
be
he's going to
humiliation.
include.
He was like, hey, he's trying to beat himself to get attention and approval. Say, I've learned my lesson, like the old Catholic self-whipping. But it was still fun to see. I mean,
I didn't see it. I didn't see it.
That's because the civil rights didn't retweet
folks.
that. They're like, the cognitive dissonance was all over the place for them. Like, but Nate said Trafalgar bad. How Trafalgar good? They're struggling with that combination. But it was a little sweet.
Look, I'm glad Robert finally got some satisfaction from that. I'm sure he did. But yeah, based on what he's going to include, because the fact of the matter is, we had
your polling was the most accurate, number one,
and even that ran again in the January 5th, which believe me,
absolutely.
you think I like that crap? I don't. I could see it. They were down. It was going to be close, but they were going to lose.
Well, you said so 3 weeks before. I mean, it was apparent. I mean, I told him when I was down there 3 days after the election, they had to make the recount, the runoff. They had to make the vote for us. We'll challenge in the Senate and do so from the get-go to fix what was happening in Georgia. And they're both scared to. And now Kelly Loeffler's going to run around pretending she's for election reform after she did nothing, after she folded, after she got scared on January 6th.
But because Trump didn't get involved, she's going to be able to do this now. This is exactly the thing, right. And I was going to say this when you brought up that he wasn't involved in Georgia. I was kind of stunned that he just sat on the sidelines after all of the fight against Kemp, after all of the fight against Crappy Burger, against, after all of 2 months worth of it. 2 months. He just didn't say much when this watered down bill got through.
He did nothing on the legislation. He's still obsessed with getting those guys beat, and I'm all for that. But, reform legislation, he still badly underappreciates the role of policy and law. Keeps getting burned by it, and personnel. There's a good book that people can read by Pat Buchanan that came out, I think, in 2016, and it was about how Nixon constantly undervalued the importance of personnel and how personnel was policy. And I remember reading, I was like, wow, this is going to be a preview of the Trump administration. And by golly, was it ever.
For that book?
Not only that.
Buchanan,
I was going to say, not only that, Buchanan talks about.
Nixon in 16.
I was going to say, Buchanan talks about how Nixon was obsessed with the New York Times, too.
Yeah, and he wanted people to like him.
Being a forebearer of Trump.
Yeah, that's why I remember talking to you about that book years ago. I do. I remember talking. That was a good book. And I remember saying to you when we had this conversation, damn, this sounds familiar. Do you remember that? And it was,
and I think it's why Buchanan put it out when he did.
Yeah, prescient, very prescient. I mean,
it was his way of being quietly sending a message about the problems that are coming.
Yeah, and he saw that one coming because that really did play out that way, Robert. It really did. Nixon was not different with Trump in that. I mean, he was raised poor. Nixon's White House Wars. That's the name of it. Nixon's White House Wars. That's it. All right, guys, great book.
It's
if you want to read it.
Definitely read it and you'll understand. Good. Basically, just change Nixon's name to Trump and you basically have 90% of the same story.
On Saturday, I was with, I don't want to give anybody away because we were talking about some stuff that, we can't have them on the record with, but in the core, right, talking about how immediately when he picked General Mattis to be the Secretary of Defense, how they basically said, even as Marines, we're not afraid to fight, of course, but we've been fighting kind of unnecessarily for way too damn long. And this is not what we're really fighting. We want to get in the suck. We like being in the suck. We just want to be in the suck for a good reason. And we just want, anyway, as far as Mattis goes, when you're ready to pull the trigger and go to war, and I have no choice, it's time to go to war. Mattis is a great person to have there, and he's great at what he does, but not as a policy guy or an advisor, because he will stay in perpetual war forever. I think people need to understand, and it's like this lionization we're doing of all these military figures. They like war. They love war. They get promoted faster because of war. They get better contracts when they leave because of war. Years and years ago, it really was about the glory, like Patton. Like, I'm going to be glorious and I'm going to run over Africa right into Europe and that's it. I'm going to be remembered as the greatest general ever. They'll be talking about me for years. He was like the real deal, with that. And they still have that element too, but it's not as much that anymore as it is, I'm going to get promoted, I'm going to make more money, I'm going to make my friends more money. This is and power and corruption too. I mean, we have to put that in there. And I mean corruption in that war benefits other illicit industries. And if you think for a second they don't know that and don't have connections with that, then you're naive. I don't know what planet you live on, but I mean, I could tell some stories someday, Robert. I could tell some stories. And, I even had friends who were looking at, in the military, were looking at this stuff through like, what do you call it? Rose-colored glasses.
Mm-hmm.
It couldn't possibly be the case. Couldn't possibly be the case. Completely not even disgruntled. That's not even the word. Just destroyed, like heartbroken when you see the truth. The ugliness. And it's not about, glory and country and God and, it's not. That's a load of crap. They feed you. It's for them. It's all for them. And Mattis is the kind of guy, he's like that guy. I hate to say it, but he is that guy. And he's not the one you want to lead the Defense Department. If you're an interventionalist, right? Then you're somebody who wants a stronger Defense Department. If you're not, and you're a realist, right, which you should be if you're smart. If you're a realist, you want a stronger countervailing force to the Defense Department. The last thing you do is pick a weakling like Tillerson, all right, to be as the head of the State Department. A corrupt weakling, by the way. All right, so a corrupt oil baron weakling to be the head of the State Department. And who does he have to be the countervailing force to? Mad Dog Jim Mattis. You're kidding me, right? I mean, this sounds like a Bush administration. It doesn't sound like a Trump administration. So right off the bat, they were giving me insight about Mattis, kind of person he is to work with professionally, and how he is on a personal level, right? And it was very clear from the people who know him, this was a catastrophic mistake. None of us would even realize how bad it would be until later. And then it made sense too, because that 2018, spring 2018, April it was April, in the White House, in the Situation Room, that meeting was the end of the road for Donald Trump. He sat everybody down. He told H.R. McMaster, Mattis was in the room. Yeah, members of the National Security Council, Mattis's entourage, and he says, I know what you're doing in Syria. I'm not joking. This shit is over. Right? You're going to bring home the CIA. It's over. We're not toppling Assad and telling the American people we're there to help with the Civil War. This is done. Time to come home. And they were like appalled because they thought they were on the precipice of convincing him to do more in Syria. And he took them by surprise. And then he just hit Mattis with it. And he said, and next is Afghanistan. So this is my instruction to you to give me a plan to legitimately, seriously leave Afghanistan. And Mattis was furious. And he was furious. And he ran to CNN. He ran to the New York Times. They all started scurrying to their respective flings, and giving them the scoop to make Trump look like a dangerous person who was going to leave a vacuum, who didn't know what he was doing, and that there was going to be a mass walkout. You remember that? Do you remember that, Nathan? And that was really it, Robert. After that, he never recovered with that part of the of his government. He never recovered from it. They were all just hoping somebody would find something to take him out.
Well, we now know that they chose to lie to him with ease, and that's because no one around him was telling them the truth about Syria and Afghanistan. And because he didn't fully get out like he had planned to and sought to, we're now seeing acceleration in Syria. And come May 1st, we're going to be back in war in Afghanistan. I mean, the media completely suppressed the fact that Trump had cut a peace deal in Afghanistan. The reason why you didn't see a bunch of soldiers die over 2020 and 2021 so far is because of the peace deal Trump cut, which said as long as no U.S. soldier is harmed, then we'll get out come May, between the time they cut the deal last year and May of this year. But now Biden came out and said, nah, we're not leaving in May. which means the Taliban has no reason not to go back to war. So we're going to have more dead soldiers. And what Peter Lavelle and George Samueli of The Gaggle, great show on YouTube that people can watch, and on Rumble, they said as of May 1st, Afghanistan is Biden's war. And they're right. It is Biden's war. And we're accelerating in Syria. We're accelerating these other places. Because Trump had so much unfinished business, because he had so many bad policy people or personnel people around him. Another example of that, aside from the disasters at the Department of Justice, what happened with Bill Barr, basically covering up. And this is where Trump is still genius. His little press missives are good. I wish he would have thought about replacing Rush. He would be more successful, in my view, than Bongino. Bongino's very good at what he does. But how many people would tune in to listen to Trump every day? Probably as many as listen to Rush. And I think Trump could be good at it. I mean, the man can just talk. I mean, if you ever been on the phone with him, by golly, yeah, if you get 2 words in, that you're lucky. But that would make him good on a talk radio. I think he would be great, and he has a natural sense of humor. And I think he could pick it up very quickly. And people then would be listening to Trump every single day, 3 hours a day, large numbers of his base, and a bunch of other people tuning in, where there's a huge gap that's left by Limbaugh that Bongino can't come close to replacing. But I guess he's not going to do that, because when he does these little missives with press releases, that the old Twitter type statements, that's where he's most effective, because he put out that statement about is John Durham a real human being? Is this guy John Durham? Is he alive? Is that a fake name? Yeah, I mean, that's classic Trump, But again, Trump, who put Durham in there? Who Bill Barr? Who put Bill Barr in there? You did. He should be more overt if I were him, criticizing Bill Barr at this point. But aside from all those disasters, the disaster of Mattis, the disaster of the State Department, really so was Pompeo. Pompeo tried to get him involved in a war in Iran, helped with Bolton to completely scuttle the North Korean peace deal that Trump was this close to getting done. That was going to be meaningful. And because Trump understands what we talked about last week, realpolitik. You're not going to get, you can go lecture North Korea, you can lecture China, you can lecture Iran, you're not going to get anywhere with him. You play realpolitik. With Iran, you say, I'm going to screw you economically until you do certain things that we think is necessary for peace in the region. With China, his approach was, again, realpolitik. You can do what you want inside your own country, but when it comes to stealing our jobs through currency manipulation and trade machinations, no mas. And I'm going to put real tariffs on you. And just to rattle your cage now and then, I'll say nice things about Taiwan unless you play ball. And help me with North Korea, since North Korea is China's bulldog and pit bull. And with North Korea, he played to the ego of Kim Jong-un, who clearly is still kind of enraptured by it. I mean, like in his recent speech, he goes, I was friends with Donald Trump. And I was like, I wonder if that guy seems to really think he was friends with Donald Trump. Like that's Trump for you. Convince a loon like Kim Jong-un that he called Rocket Boy that he's really, you're my buddy, pal. Yeah, you're okay. Yeah, you're a good basketball shooter. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. That kind of, you might be starving all your people, but hey, that's not your fault. Don't worry. Well, let's cut a deal and we'll be all right. That was the genius of Trump, but it didn't get done because of all the personnel. And now we find out not only the disaster and what was happening on the Pentagon side with Syria and Afghanistan now being in more vulnerable positions, Yemen not getting resolved and accelerating in a very precarious manner in terms of what they're now, going back and forth in and out of Saudi Arabia. The Iranians are more aggressive. The Al-Qaeda is more aggressive. Iran basically said shove off. China said shove off. Russia said shove off. And we're seeing these hot spots in Ethiopia, Venezuela, Bolivia, and Ukraine accelerate. But on top of all of this, we find out that a key person in charge of aspects of the Secret Service that was a deputy chief of staff of operations of Trump helped cover up Hunter Biden's scandal while he was in the Trump administration. I mean, that helped Biden. I mean, because they hit all the lefty trigger points, to play on a phrase, play on a word, because you got somebody buying a gun who probably shouldn't have one. Who's lying in order to get that gun, saying, I don't have a drug problem. Drug problem? Me, Hunter? What drug problem? I've never had a drug problem. While he's busy banging his dead brother's wife, because that's his method of condolences, apparently. They got unique methods in the Biden family. Did you suffer a tragedy? Okay, let me give you a nice little hug. And then he gets a gun, and he so terrifies her that she takes the gun and throws it away because she's terrified of him, because of maybe some photos with a niece, but that's another thing. And then all of it gets covered up thanks to that would have been a perfect scandal. You could have taken out Biden, especially if it leaked that the Secret Service tried to cover it up, and so the FBI didn't investigate, compounding all the other problems that Hunter Biden had. And it could have happened before he ever got anywhere in 2020. But it's Trump's own employee, own key personnel who covers it up from Trump for the Bidens and from the country for Bidens. And it's just another indicator of where that's a weakness Trump has got to work on. And so far he has not. But we saw another example of it with the two-tiered system of justice with the way Hunter Biden gets special treatment like he's a Stasi official or Soviet diplomats official.
Yeah, I mean, Rob, right off the bat when he left the White House, and I told you about this certain phone call with this certain administration official who was just devastated. I mean, first of all, was asked to help and said no with a certain problem Donald Trump had immediately following him leaving the White House, and they got mad at him like, how dare you're gonna abandon him now, and they're the ones, or he was the one who felt abandoned because there was so much left on the table. So the Hunter Biden stuff, how much they knew about Joe's knowledge of what was going on with China and the Bidens, there's just so much more that even the New York Post reported, and they convinced him basically, in the very much the same manner why he didn't pardon Assange and Snowden, that if you play by the rules, then they're nicer with you and they handle you a little bit better. This is how it was explained to me anyway. I mean, maybe the president would find this to be an unfair characterization, but this sounds legit to me. It does.
Trump's own appointees in the Secret Service, Trump's own appointees in the FBI, Trump's own appointees in the Department of Justice, Trump's own appointees at the United States Attorney's Office level, and Trump's own appointees in the White House. And actually some of Trump's own appointees in the State Department, all combined had to all conspire to keep information from both Trump and the country implicating Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. And that, again, I mean, that's the degree, the severity of his personnel failure. He had to screw up in position after position after position after position after position after position, and he did. And unless he comes to terms with it, it's going to be a problem. We're just seeing more and more ramifications of it. And now in potential war zones, in what happened with Hunter Biden and what happened in 2020 and what's happening in public policy in general and in his judicial appointments and prosecutorial empowerment. That prosecutor who was going nuts, that D.C. prosecutor who disclosed stuff he was not supposed to disclose about, I'm putting people in prison related to the January 6th riots, not because it's justified, but because I want to intimidate and terrorize Trump supporters into not going to public protests. I mean, says that effectively on 60 Minutes. He gets away with it initially, but that guy, he got in through Trump. I mean, that guy didn't get in through anywhere else but Trump. He was in that position of power because of Trump. This was a repeated, huge blind spot. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing encouragement on the election front from Trump world in terms of election law reform. I'm not seeing encouragement about how he's going to monetize his brand and create an independent media platform, seeing actually evidence of just the opposite. Both in the talk radio space and in the TV space. And his idea for social media of creating his own strikes me as much more counterproductive than productive. The probabilities of that working strike me as less likely than monetizing his brand in some other way. So he's going to be where he's going to be good is challenging people who voted for impeachment, and people he's mad about related to the election in Georgia in particular. For whatever reason, he's locked into, I know why he's locked into Georgia in part, but there's similar such officials in Arizona, but I haven't seen much talk about it. But unfortunately, where we're not seeing much, so we're not seeing proactive populist organizational building like Andrew Jackson. The way I compare it is there's two great populists who lost, who had their election arguably stolen from them. And that was Andrew Jackson in 1824 and William Jennings Bryan in 1896.
Yes. I was just going to say, William
Jackson bounced back in 1828 because he put a tight-knit organization of very smart political people around him that created the Democratic Party you know today, and that kept loyalty that was so good and so effective. It had loyalty going on over 100 years. That's how successful it was. By contrast, William Jennings Bryan didn't do that. William Jennings Bryan stayed on the ego circuit and the lecture circuit, and all he did was keep losing. He never won. He never built a populist reform committee. In fact, populism started to dissipate because Bryan sucked up too much of the oxygen and didn't organize institutionally. And so the question right now, Donald Trump is acting a lot more like William Jennings Bryan after 1896 than Andrew Jackson after 1824. And that doesn't bode well for his ability to really brand and build populism. It's going to have to be independent of him unless he changes course sometime soon.
Yeah, WJB, he's more associated. That's why he's more associated as a progressive. And I think on some things, of course, it's fair to call him a progressive. But at his core, he was a populist. And
no doubt about it. I mean, it was willing to defend creationism when it was intensely unpopular in certain circles in the famous Scopes trial.
And that's
I'm not worried about the age of rock, son. I'm worried about the rock ages. I mean, there was, brilliant Bryanite lines throughout that. Bryan really won that trial, in my view. It's been misportrayed by Hollywood after the fact against Clarence Darrow. Bryan was much more effective rhetorically and in persuasion than Darrow was. They actually had the trial outside because it was so popular, everybody wanted to watch. Bryan College is named after him in Dayton, Tennessee for that reason. And by the way, Bryan was originally not against Darwinism. He became against Darwinism when he saw social Darwinism. When you realize, wow, changing how your origin story from God created us to we arose from apes by survival of the fittest, that doesn't have a good effect on society. It has a very bad effect on society, as he got to witness with social Darwinism. So he started out saying, I believe creationism and evolution can work together within the origin story of the Bible, that the means and method by which God created the world could be consistent with evolution as a theory of science. But then he saw social Darwinism, and he's like, no. It turns out contaminating our origin stories is not such a good idea. This is why Native American groups are the other big group that's anti-evolution in many capacities, because they understand the importance of origin stories to people's self-justification and moral limitation. And so that's why he began to oppose it. And social Darwinism gave us eugenics. Social Darwinism gave us the Nazis. So I'm not a big fan of the impact of Darwinism on the world. If you want to apply
Planned Parenthood, Robert.
Oh yes, morally offended. And so, I mean, Bryan and was one of the great. I mean, probably the greatest speech up to that point since Patrick Henry, "Give me liberty or give me death," was William Jennings Bryan, who stole that convention. He wasn't anticipated to be the nominee in 1896 by saying, you will not crucify me on a cross of gold. And it was about the way the gold standard was being utilized to suppress various things related to farmers and silver miners. And so so he was great. I mean, they rigged. I mean, they basically told people back then you didn't have a secret ballot in many places. They said, unless your ballot's marked the right way, you don't have a job. Come back if you come back Wednesday. So that was the kind of open theft that took place in the 1896 election. But unfortunately, Bryan didn't respond with a Jacksonian type organization. He would have some influence through the rest of his career, would be Secretary of State at one point, would try to push for peace in a range of areas, would be a positive presence, like no doubt Trump will be. But if he wants to build populism to last past Trump, he needs to take the Jacksonian path. And so far, he has failed to do that.
The very first opportunity that he had to build a real infrastructure, and I mean one that includes elected officials. This is what we're talking about, folks, when we say he needs an infrastructure. It's more than just a ground game, going out to knock on doors in Delaware and Montgomery to try to keep the margins down. We're talking about once you get in and you need to affect change. Once you get in, you need to defend what you have done, right? Otherwise, they'll just dismantle your legacy. You need a machine within that government, and he just didn't do it. And Georgia was it, which is why I was just so stunned during this process. He didn't do anything. And I mean, I don't know anybody who got a call from him and said, listen.
No call from him, no call from anybody in his world.
No. I mean, that's even the legislators who are working on it. There's a lot of people getting a lot of calls from like 2 and 3 time separated acolytes of some of the people in Trump's world a lot, but it's like their opportunity to try to build names for themselves. And I mean, Laura and I caught it immediately. I mean, we were just like, these people, and by the way, they're just like, a lot of them just try to grift you for favors, so they can later try to pass it off as their own work, right? And it's true. It's totally true. And by the way, a lot of people wouldn't have noticed if it wasn't for Navarro.
Can only succeed because Trump has left a vacuum for them to walk into.
He has.
And that's able to pretend she's the big election law reformers because Trump's not there. So Trump should be the leader of this. He creates a PAC. The PAC is slow to operate, slow to get going. It leaked that he was upset about that fact, but a large part of it is because he's not building an organization that can last outside of him. I mean, he would still be the heavyweight if he enters the 2024 primaries and likely prevail. And but whether he could win in the general is up in the air because, again, he's not making sure the institutional reforms take place so that 2020 doesn't repeat as to him. And he needs to stay ahead of the curve. Right now he's a player. He's not much different than a senator. In other words, he'll be in the news on the right one day out of the week. That isn't where you want to be. You want to be dominating the conversation, initiating ideas, initiating policy proposals, building allies at every single level. Create effectively your own party, which you can do through the Republican Party. I mean, if this was Ted Cruz, he would be making sure every little county precinct position was being filled by his people. Trump is not doing that.
Cruz was really good at that in 60.
Yeah, he was.
Oh man, he was really. A lot of people don't realize that.
That's how he lost Louisiana really and ended up with more delegates.
Yeah, right. I mean, right. And, Wisconsin, too, that's how he was able to mount that. Indiana was the end of the line, of course, but that was a little bit different of an electorate.
That's because his daddy was on the grassy knoll.
On the grassy knoll.
Trump called out. They called up the morning before just as one last tweak to tell Cruz to get out of the race. What was his dad doing on the grassy knoll? What was his dad doing down there?
Come on, Bryan. What was his dad doing on the grassy knoll? That was on Fox and Friends, man. That was just too much.
That's great Trump. And we see little glimpses of it, but not enough of it. Hopefully he'll do something. We'll see. All people, the more pushback he gets is the only way he ends up hearing and listening and absorbing and taking action. And he clearly needs it, or he's going to be very limited in being able to achieve what he himself wants to achieve.
Yeah, Georgia, I got to tell you, Robert, Georgia, very disappointing. Republicans need a good election in the midterm, and they need to add to those reforms with their new legislature and their new governor, because otherwise Georgia is not. They
got Bernard Jones and Herschel Walker running. I mean, so you're a perfect environment to really take back the state, change the state, reform the state, make sure it doesn't happen again. Don't let Atlanta dominate the rest of the state. They also could be meaningful investigation by a real attorney general. Unfortunately, Georgia doesn't have one. The Republican attorney general is a joke. But into Stacey Abrams' operation, because we gathered lots of evidence that there were connections between Abrams' machine and unusual voting patterns.
Yep. It's not. Yeah. I mean, you can't possibly ignore that. You just can't. But they caved, which was it's just astonishing. I do want to. It's like what 332. Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, you brought up the trial, Jennings, Bryan. This is the first trial in Minnesota that's going to be live streamed, right? So we're talking about the trial of Derek Chauvin. Switching gears real quick. He wanted them to live stream it, Robert. Yes. I can imagine he wants everybody in the country to hear the rest of the evidence that he damn well knows. If you're the defense, you got to know the media is not going to tell your story. It doesn't matter how bad of a bombshell. It's going to come out like Trump's impeachment, where it was the first 1.0, which was Russiagate 2.0, right? But, there would be something that was completely exculpatory, and the media would just ignore it. And you'd hear, we heard damning evidence tonight. Like earlier today, we had damning evidence in the trial against Donald Trump. And you're like, oh my God, that's completely not what happened. But if you're the defense in Chauvin's case, you got to want it a direct line to the American people. You got to. Because it's the only way you're going to get a fair shake.
Well, I was surprised. Their opening statements were real short. So maybe that was by the judge's order. But I was surprised by that. For a 4-week trial, I expected opening statements to be all day, not to be so short. So I only saw some headlines from the opening statements. If the headlines are right, the prosecutors did exactly what I thought they would do and predicted yesterday on the Law for the People show with Viva Fry. But the defense appeared to do a subpar job. So because unless the headlines are, as what you're talking about, lying. So what the defense should have done is got up and tell the story. Don't get up there and remind the jury what reasonable doubt is. None of that nonsense. Get up and tell them a story. Tell the jury a story, and basically get up and say, here's what happened, and from beginning to end, and basically tell a story where the jury comes to the conclusion before you need to tell them the conclusion that Floyd, in your argument for the defense, killed himself by trying to ingest a bunch of drugs to keep the police from finding him. And the same thing had happened a year before where he barely survived. And there was no reference to that by anybody covering it, which tells me, so again, either the media is completely lying, which is possible, or they did a real weak defense, a real weak opening statement. And that would be a major, major miscue. Yeah, I mean, as the studies that you've seen and helped do, you either have them or you don't after opening statement. I mean, think about the cases you've looked at where the large numbers of people that won't change their mind no matter how compelling the evidence is once they give their opinion. That's just the nature of the animal. I was telling people on the Viva Fry Law for the People show that if one of the weaknesses in the defense was not doing real jury research and venue research with pollsters. And I was mentioning that you've done that work with me in the past, and we do it so that if we need to move venue, we have actual data to support it. They never produced it. I kind of wonder whether they failed to do that for jury selection too. What we can say is demographically, based on the polling data we've reviewed, the prosecutor loves the jury pool because of the demographics. It's I mean, Minneapolis and Hennepin County, a typical 14-person jury with 12 jurors, 2 alternates, would have 1 African-American and 1 other minority member, then would have 5 to 6 white guys and 5 to 6 white women, and then most of them would be over 50 with at least
45, 50 above,
retirees. This jury, I think, only has 1 person over 65, has only 2 white guys on the whole jury, is 6 African-Americans on the jury. Now, the defense may know individualized information about these jurors because they filled out questionnaires, were able to search their social media. If they were smart, they also did the database research that you do, and they may know things about this jury that the prosecution does not. That the prosecution went on general polling data, and the defense went on individualized information. If that's what happened, then the defense may be in the game. And what I've told people is if a certain African-American man, like I got pushback on this yesterday when I was talking about, people were like, there's no way. People don't understand. In a typical jury, for example, let's say it's a sexual assault case and you're the prosecutor and the victim is a 25-year-old woman and the accused is a 35-year-old man. What you want on the jury from the prosecution's perspective is a bunch of fathers. What you don't want is a bunch of young women, anyone that looks like the victim. So, if I were the prosecution, I would have not picked African-American men for this jury because one response of African-American men is that they do relate to Floyd, but what that leads them to do is to say, how can this event not happen to me? Oh, I wouldn't have done all these things that Floyd did. Thus, I'm safe. So acquittal means they're safer. Conviction means they're more at risk. So I think it was a major mistake by the prosecutor. Now, older African-American women that are mothers would be very protective. They can't be there, so they're going to hold the police to a hyper level of responsibility. But I think there's only one of those on the entire jury pool. So the jury pool, it looks like a pro-prosecution lynching jury, but I think, in fact, may be much more balanced than they know. And it will create real cognitive dissonance if a jury led by black men with a black male foreman acquits Chauvin of the Floyd murder. Alleged Floyd murder. Imagine, what's the left going to do with that? The cognitive dissonance will be more than what they deal with Candace Owens. And so I think there's a fair chance at acquittal of at least the top 2 counts, but I was not impressed by what I heard the defense argument was today, opening statement. And for people who don't know, 80% of cases are won or lost by research after opening statement. So, it doesn't matter. Some defense lawyers think jurors wait until they hear all the evidence. No, they don't. They decide in advance who they like and who they don't, and then they filter the evidence. And think about politics. Think about the left. If you say something the left doesn't like or doesn't want to hear, do they say, well, I'm going to change my mind because the evidence came in? No, they just memory hold that evidence. That evidence doesn't exist. That's the nature of motivated reasoning. So if you don't win them at opening statement, you're not going to win them by closing argument. So if it was as weak as people said it was, Chauvin's in trouble. If the media is just lying, and I'll watch the actual opening statement later today, then I think Chauvin's very much in the game. But it's one mistake of lawyers is underutilization of good polling and good pollsters in the jury selection process, in the venue transfer process, all of that, in testing evidence, in testing theories, in testing strategies. Like they're apparently testing, or they're going with a strategy of, hey, it was a real chaotic scene. There's this angry crowd, and Chauvin's kind of frozen. And that's why he's not reacting. I wouldn't focus on Chauvin's state of mind. That's a weak link. Focus on Floyd's state of mind. Focus on what Floyd is doing. Focus on causation. Focus on training. Don't focus on the rest. And I did predict this. I said that what they'll do is they'll do a timeline with some nice fancy visuals that focus on the 8.5 minutes. TikTok, warning, nothing happens. Warning, nothing happens. Warning, nothing happens. Warning. And
that'd be the smart play.
Exactly what they did.
That's the smart play. And in the meantime,
well, remember we planned that for a civil case we had. Remember, it was like tick 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 tick.
Yeah.
The amount of time, it's always a great way
powerful.
to use it. And instead of a clock sound, you do a heart sound. Like that, they could have tuned it up a little bit. That's what I would have done if I was the Floyd prosecutor, and this is a private lawyer that's been hired to do this case. Amazing. I knew they were bringing out the African American guy for the opening statement, for the Johnny Cochran style presentation. And he's good. He's skilled, from what I know. But I would have not made the clock the sound of a clock. I would have made it the sound of a heartbeat. And the heartbeat's just getting less and less and less. Warning, warning,
little
warning.
by little.
Less and less. Until
that would have had a hell of an impression. That would have had a hell of an
and stuck with them right in their head.
There was a way the defense could have turned that around.
Yeah, absolutely. I would have said, focused on the drugs.
Jose Baez, that puppy.
I would have acted like I was telling the 2020 story and then told him it's actually what happened in 2019. And then just say it happened again. Because that's the shock. Like you lead in, he's pulled over. You don't even give the date yet because the judge will be nervous about what you can get in 2019. So you just start with, he's pulled over. They're asking him to do things. He won't comply. He's doing something weird with his hand. They're trying to pull him out. He won't get in the car. He's trying to resist. Then all of a sudden the paramedics arrive and, oh my goodness, he's near dead. They have to try to resuscitate him, rush him to the hospital. It turns out he had ingested a bunch of dangerous drugs to keep the police from finding it. And folks, this was 2019, a year before what happened in 2020. And then repeat it, because then it'd be like, oh, hold on a second.
Yeah.
That would have.
Man.
So I think
that was good.
Mid-tier, if it's as mediocre as people said it was, then Chauvin's already behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, what I heard is that it basically was your very traditional lecture.
Now listen,
on
Jerry,
what the standard
this is what's beyond reasonable doubt.
That's it. You got it. That's it. That's what I heard it was.
You save that for closing argument. You find a couple of good analogies for beyond a reasonable doubt. Whenever you start off with beyond a reasonable doubt, you know what most juries think? Oh, your client's guilty. And you're trying to convince me, well, you can't prove it. Maybe guilty, but you can't prove it. That's not, never start there. Never start. Tell them a story where they come to the conclusion before you tell them the conclusion. So they're invested in that conclusion. And then you're rocking and rolling. And then they filter all the evidence they see through that. No juror can sit there 6 hours and absorb every piece of testimony and evidence. It just can't happen. At least a half the time, if they're not asleep, literally, they're asleep in their own head. They'll be trying to pay attention. But, look at recall rates of students with teachers in classes. They don't recall what they learned 30 minutes ago. They've tested this with jurors. Even jury instructions given by the judge in the solemn, emotionally impactful moment. Within an hour, half of the jurors will have forgot the jury instructions when they've done testing on this in other contexts. So
Yeah, we've done.
they're not going to the evidence. They're going to pre-filter the evidence. They're going to pre-filter it through their own prism, and you want to shape that filter. You want to frame the question beforehand. So what they're looking for when this witness testifies is, I wonder about this. I wonder about this. I mean, I once had a case. I lost at the jury trial level, got a settlement later, but drove me crazy. But a juror leader told me, I would have really liked to know the answer to this question. And it was the question I'd addressed 15 times in the trial. So just one more reminder, if you don't win them at opening statement, there ain't nothing you're going to do to win them later.
Yeah, we tried, because when we were trying to see how much of a scenario that you're going to give any old respondent or potential juror, and you're trying to get, their take on a certain case scenario, but you're really trying to find out belief systems, right? 750 words, Robert. At a time, they could retain 750 words. You have to break space in between and say something like, if you only knew this, what would, based on this limited information, what would how would you vote in the verdict, right? And then give them more. Remember, that's because we found 750 words is all they could take before their brains just started to fatigue and wander, and we knew, from not only dropouts and abandonment rates, but queues, that's it. And ironically, I remember it may have been the AP guidelines I saw or something. It was something that was related to a media outlet, and they basically said, when it comes to these news stories, these kinds of news stories that are not, it was 700 to 900. I think they found 900 max. 700 is really kind of not good, but anything in between, basically Goldilocks. When you start to push 900, you're losing them. So cut the story short. And that I found funny, because that is what it really backed up what we found. Yeah, because you really have to cut stuff.
Editing.
So you don't want, the editing, because you don't want to miss out on something that's critical to test. You don't want to cut something out. You want to make sure they're getting everything particular to that scenario. But that you're literally on the clock here. I mean, every word they read. So imagine sitting there now, even though it's verbal. Imagine sitting there and having to listen and retain all of that. That's why, what you're talking about doing, that's what Jose Baez did in the Casey Anthony case. He did not come out and give a lecture on reasonable doubt. He told a very tragic story about how a little girl died, but it was nobody's fault. And that you can't, and then later in the summation, he railed what's reasonable doubt is all about. And he had the benefit of the prosecution making some really bad mistakes, I'm sure, right? And, and then lying. I mean, the jury hates it when they catch a prosecutor, right?
Yes.
They hate it when they catch a prosecutor in a lie. It's like, you piece of junk, you really tried to get this by me.
Well,
They're supposed to be above that. Even the authoritarians don't like it, because it's like they instinctively trust the prosecutor, and then it's like you shattered and hurt their feelings that you would take it to that level. Yeah, so right. So that's really, I should listen to it myself too, but I heard it was a very not the whole thing, which very run of the mill, open it up. Yeah. Here's what reasonable doubt means.
Based on the jury dynamics in Minneapolis and based on that opening statement, I would currently say 75% chance of conviction on a count, 50% chance of conviction on all three counts. We'll see what the odds actually are. There likely will be offshore betting odds on the verdict in this case. I made money betting on OJ getting acquitted when I was a kid. May have had a client make some money on his own acquittals, but that's another story for another day. But speaking of odds, the reason why H.R. 1 is in serious trouble, though people are organizing effectively to fight it legally if it gets through, depending on what gets through, there is also good recognition by some very smart lawyers that what Democrats will do is they'll break it up into subconstituent parts if it fails the first time en masse. But the reason why they're going to have filibuster troubles is because the dear senator from West Virginia, I get Biden's trying to bribe him every way known to man by giving his wife a job and promising this and that. But what's unrecognized, he's going to have to do something very specific for West Virginia, because the rumor is that Manchin wants to run for governor of West Virginia. And that's why he may stick to his guns on the filibuster. that he's looking to gain credibility and minimize opposition when he runs for governor of West Virginia, and sticking with the filibuster is a key tool for it. Sinema also thinks she can become the Democratic McCain in Arizona by sticking to the filibuster. So they're going to have, that's why they're putting maximum pressure on both, but chances are neither one of them is going to fold. So as long as they don't fold, the way they rush through the legislation, the HR 1, now Senate 1, will get filibustered and will not get through. The other factor is they made
Robert Sinema's a shrewd politician. She turned she turned out to be. She didn't turn into one. She turned out to be an incredibly shrewd politician.
I was going to say something stereotypical, but I'll just say women with certain behaviors tend to be shrewd. Just saying. You know, I got these stereotypes that are maybe inappropriate, maybe politically incorrect, but I found them to be really true. You know, I generally trust, like if you want somebody on your, you know, well, I won't say on YouTube, but there's certain men of certain persuasions I inherently don't trust, and certain women of the same persuasion I do trust, because that's been my experience. But I'll put it at that. So I think that's where that is. But so I think they're going to have trouble getting anything that has. And the big mistake was that they decided to screw over and keep out and exclude everyday Democratic election clerks. People have probably thought they should be the featured heroes of that time story.
That's right.
Because they're the ones who helped make sure this election went the way it went. Well, they decided not to include them, and they're putting a bunch of commands on them without guarantee funding, and they know that the states likely won't go along with that for state or local office, so they'll have different election rules depending on which office it is, which is an administrative nightmare. And so they were so mad that they got excluded. They went to the Daily Beast, of all people, went to a CNN legal analyst who got into a debate with Viva Fry and then ran away. Who runs away from Viva? I mean, Viva's one of the nicest people on the planet.
Intellectually intimidated. That's what happened there, Robert.
Yes,
That's what happened there.
He couldn't hide his smartness, which is that was his weakness in not being able to get the debate. But basically, Daily Beast ran a piece that said where these election officials are on record saying if HR 1 passes, our next election will be, quote, a shit show. A total. That's their words. A total. Shit show.
Yeah.
And so I've been encouraging all the Republicans on the HR 1 side, the lawyer side, the political side, is like, use that. Because they're gonna do. I predicted what Joe Biden was gonna do. Said, they're gonna portray this as a racism issue. They're gonna call it Jim Crow election laws, etc. And say, no. The Democrats' own election administrators say we can't do this, or it's going to be a total shit show. So I was like, just keep using that quote. Oh, it's complete protection politically in the court of public opinion. Use this to just drive a wedge right through the Democratic coalition in the public narrative. And they haven't picked up on it yet. This is where Trump was organizing things. It'd be a lot better, but hopefully they will. Because in my view, the combination of why Sinema and Manchin are doing what they're doing, plus the election officials being off the reservation on this proposed legislation, is death nailed. And that's critical, because if HR 1 passed, it doesn't matter what you did in the state, because now you have federal election law that governs all elections. Your local office doesn't matter. Your state office doesn't matter. Just the federal office matters. So because it changed signature match rules, it changed registration rules, it changed early voting rules, it changed Dropbox rules, it mandated all these things. It took the 2020 election and required every state in the country to utilize the most egregious methods that I identified by the Michigan courts as illegal, by the Virginia courts after the election as illegal, identified in part by multiple Wisconsin Supreme Court judges as illegal, so on and so forth. So hopefully we'll see that message get through and get out, because it looks like HR 1 is in serious trouble, but they can push it over the edge of the cliff if they use smart PR strategy going forward.
Yeah, the addition of Sinema was huge, and then that headline last week was payback. That's how I viewed it. That Daily Beast headline, that was payback, because, like you said, and we've talked about many times, the evidence that we gathered and others gathered, like Matt Brainerd, there is no way you can conduct an operation on this scale without public sector union support or organization, and at least compliance from district county clerks, whatever, supervisors of elections. There's just no way. We're talking about things that were going on for months, and there's no chance. And by the way, where the hell is my apology from PolitiFact with Jocelyn Benson? Yeah, okay. That story. Where is that? That ruling from the Michigan State judge got basically no mainstream media coverage. She broke the law, like I said she did, and that resulted in ballots going out that should not have gone out. Period.
Joe Biden didn't fall on any steps. That they just sort of gaslight about that. Hunter Biden wasn't caught in another major scandal. They mostly gaslight about that. They I mean, they did at least talk about Joe Biden saying he'd been in the Senate for 120 years. And that's probably a good transition into what Peter Lavelle called the depressor conference last week, rather than the press conference. It was embarrassing. I mean, you need a coloring book to guide you to asking the question. A coloring book?
Oh my God!
I mean, how is that? It's one thing to have some sort of guidepost, but they put little photos. Remember, Joe, that's who this one is. Remember, Joe, they probably give him that too internally. They're like, don't sniff that deputy health secretary's
don't do that,
hair,
right?
Because she may not be exactly having your typical female hair. So be a little careful with that one, Joe. It was embarrassing. I mean, they have pre-framed questions, pre-read answers, a coloring book instruction guide, and he still screws up. Says he's been in the United States Senate for 120 years, and then they pretended that was a joke. Oh, that was a joke. That wasn't a joke. That was like the joke Joe was telling during the campaign where he'd get stuff wrong. But hey, it's good to be here, and then someone would say, no, it's not here. Oh,
he did in Florida.
I was kidding.
He did in Florida. He comes out and he's like, it's really great to be here in something, Iowa. And Laura and I are like, what? You're in Palm Beach, Florida, idiot. And then he was like, oh, I'm just kidding.
No.
Funny, everybody. Joe not crazy.
My favorite was Obama when he was like, over here, Joe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's like walking the wrong direction. Barack Obama's like,
but he says,
get over here. I mean, come on. And they just, it's a speech, like Dave Rubin always quibs. It's just a speech.
Well, you see what? I mean, they won't let him call any foreign leaders. Almost all the foreign leader calls are going through. I mean, that's why Putin could expose him so quickly. Say, one, I wish you good health. Hint, hint. And number two, hey, let's debate live with no moderator. They know he can't. He literally can't. It's just pitiful, just sad. And then the amount of issues he just flagrantly gaslit the world and lied about, in terms of on everything related to the border. Hey, we'll allow press access as soon as we cover everything up. It's like what? But then pretending that the issues are not of his creation, pretending they're not big issues, pretending that they don't have the consequences that they do. And he lied about a wide range of topics in that capacity. He lied about the filibuster. I mean, pretending that the filibuster is some Jim Crow era invention of the right. I mean, I think someone did a stat review in the last 10 years. It's something like Democrats have done 100 times more filibusters than Republicans have.
We did it on court nominees. We did a mathematical analysis of the use of the filibuster on court nominees and Supreme Court nominees as well. It wasn't even close. Not even close. And then it really got ramped up, after borking became not accessible, became acceptable. Once that happened, it started to even trickle down to, I don't want to say they're inconsequential because they're not. A federal bench appointment's consequential. But, something that these positions that were not very controversial, the district courts of appeals, and they would give them these, horrible, these terrible hearings. Oh, let me try to reconnect them. I lost them for a second. Disconnect, reconnect. Yeah, let me disconnect and reconnect them. But that's all right. It was almost time. Anyway, let's see if I can grab them. I got him. I would have rolled. Oh, Robert, can you answer a question before we kick rocks here?
Yep.
All right.
Well, there's two for Robert. Profoundly Vanilla wants to know, I saw on the Rebel Capitalist...
Can you hear her? Hold on one second. Can you? Yeah, okay, got it.
I saw on the Rebel Capitalist that George Gammon hired Robert Barnes to sue the Fed. Hope to hear more about that on
Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, so there'll be more announcements in the future, but basically the goal is in order to audit the Fed, we're going to sue the Fed. So over the past 10 years, the Fed has lost a couple of key cases on the Freedom of Information Act. Previously, they would say that information was outside of it, that information was being held by their constituent banks or boards of governors, and consequently, they didn't have to produce it, that those weren't government agencies within the meaning of the FOIA laws. They lost a lot of those cases. So consequently, that means there's ways to get information like never before from the Federal Reserve and its constituent banks, or you force them to claim that what they did was not statutorily authorized in order to get around FOIA, but that creates a new legal grounds to sue that they're doing things they're not authorized to do statutory. There's a bunch of things they've been doing they were never given clear statutory authorization to do, in manipulating the markets and the rest. So the goal is to get the information that either proves that, to be able to sue the Fed in order to audit the Fed, or to be able to use the Fed's own admissions in response to the FOIA suits to bring a second class of litigation against them for doing things they're not authorized to do in the first place. And so George Gammon will be announcing more about that. He'll be taking the lead. He's going to be creating a crowdfunding site where he matches dollar for dollar everything everybody gives to help make it a reality. So he's committed to doing everything's necessary so that I'm doing it at a discounted cost, but there's always cost involved in these things. And he's doing it, and he's matching it to make sure we can meet that no matter what. So it'll be also, people have not gone back and looked at the old records. So they haven't used FOIA, the new discoveries on FOIA, to ask for things over time, like some of their conversations after 1913, which might be very, very interesting as to their own knowledge, as their own limits on their own legal authority, as their own intentions of misusing and abusing the system to enrich and profit a small circle of people at the expense of the mass public. So we're going to come up with a big, long list. We're going to ultimately crowdsource what other information people want for us to request through the FOIA process. We'll start with the FOIA process in April, see how they respond. If they play games and delay and the rest, we'll be in litigation by summer, and then they'll have to either defend themselves by admitting their actions are unauthorized or have to allow us to really audit the Fed. So it's sue the Fed in order to audit the Fed, with the end goal being to end the Fed. So they'll be able to use the information we develop to educate the public to change the legal structure of things going forward.
It's brilliant. It's basically using older, the precedent that they've collected over the last decade or so, and then building. It's like this. It's like audit by discovery, and I mean, this is smart, Robert. And somebody asked me the other day what could be done about that. What a perfect time for this to happen. Because the question prompted a conversation, and I probably spent 15, 30 minutes on it, the history, everything, and that how this is tension even between executive branches and the Fed is really nothing new. People tried to make this thing over with Trump. Remember how Trump used to smack Powell, right? And they would make this thing and like it was something new, and it really isn't. It's just that the Fed kind of got a life of its own and became a branch of its own. And, and nobody other than Ron Paul, right? I mean, and that wing had talked about it getting crazy. But I bet you at this point, probably 60% of Americans, because we've asked this question, 60% of Americans would support some form of audit. It's overwhelming when we ask whether or not there needs to be a monitoring of some sort, whether that is the Congress periodically reviews them, whatever, something like that, or it's done in a more intimate, private way. And people, it's amazing how many people don't, this is an issue you see the political class rally behind and pretend like it's crazy. But when you ask the rest, it's one of those issues. And then when you ask the rest of the country, they're like, well, no, why would the Fed be allowed to operate autonomously? Where the hell they get that authority from? So it's one of those issues where it's completely different on the coasts as it is in the rest of the country. Yeah, only vast majority. Well, it's four. For Robert. One more.
Sorry, Robert.
403. He's probably got a meeting.
Cranman Photo Cinema wants to know, Barnes, why should we doubt the GBI investigation of voting fraud?
Say that one more time.
Why should we doubt the GBI investigation?
Yeah. Okay, sure. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation is not what the United States Elections Assistance Commission and the OECD's election observers rules require. It's not you do not delegate or create a precedent of saying we'll just let the government tell us whether the signatures match or not. That's why you have to have party observers who have an interest in contesting and challenging the signatures, which no state actor does, in order to be able to make sure there's a meaningful signature match process in place. That's what the rules of transparency require. That's what the rules that were recommended by every election commission guideline, the United States Election Assistance Commission that was created for this purpose, blue ribbon election committees were created, the OECD's international election observers require, all of them. In fact, the OECD, while it was buried in their report, it said that this did not happen and it was a systematic violation. You need party observers to match the signatures. Otherwise, you will not get a meaningful signature check. And imagine, how can we as America tell the rest of the world that their election procedures have to be observed by party observers, but we refuse to do so in our own elections? That's hypocrisy and fraud at its core in terms of what we're telling the world. And we failed that. And that's why I never defer to what the state government tells me. A state government actor is not reliable because, one, it's an important precedent to set for the rest of the world, and two, they don't have the incentive. They don't have the incentive to challenge the signatures. And if you had the signature match check they did in Michigan, and we don't know what standards they used in Georgia, we just know they had a similar incredibly low rejection rate like Michigan did. And what did the court say in Michigan? Said that was a completely violation of the law, the election check, the signature match check they were doing. Their signature match check said that if you went from signing your name in cursive to writing it in 5-year-old block print, that still might be a match. That's a crime.
Yeah, you had to give the benefit of the doubt to the ballot, or to the signature that it matched, even if there were, I forgot the term, but significant variations between prior signatures. That's like the opposite of the point of a law. Right? I mean, and in this case, just to piggyback off of what Robert's saying, that is tantamount to allowing the accused to investigate themselves. And that's really what you're doing. At the very least, Robert, the state is incentivized not to find problems because at the very least, and I mean the very least, they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to be embarrassed.
And if you're the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, where do your incentives lie? Your incentives lie in ratting out election officials, ratting out your bosses, ratting out the state officials because they trained those election officials to do signature match checks. Do they have any interest and incentive in saying, oh, it turned out the people we trained and our bosses are incompetent phonies and frauds? They have none. So they're not going to do it. Not only that, they admit their own thing that they didn't check most of the signatures. They only checked a small random sample. Third, when they did a real signature match check in Arizona, the Democrats' own handwriting expert came back and said 10% of them did not conclusively match. So that's the only signature match check that that any independent observer was involved with anywhere in the country, and they came back
that's the margin.
With a rate 30 times higher than the margin of victory. And last but not least, if the signatures match, why won't they let any party observers see them? Why won't they let the public see them? So what do they? If there's no problem with the ballots, why won't they publish the ballots to the world like they promised they would 2 years ago? So that if there's no issues, then there should be no problem with independent party observers, no problem with public transparency, no problem with full disclosure. None of that has occurred anywhere.
And as we found out in Michigan, it is the law for them to keep those applications for 6 years after the election, yet they would not give them to us voluntarily. We would have to sue to get them. Why did I want them? Because as I've showed people in the show, when we read the names, the block is right there. Here's your signature. If you're living, and this is why it was so important to me to get those applications, because of the number of change of address flags, I needed to see when somebody had a COA, and I know damn well, I know it for sure, that they are not eligible to vote from this residence anymore, or they don't even live in the state anymore in many cases. Where did they say to mail the ballot? And that is what is very important. Not just whether the signature matched, but whether or not they put the same address. So, Robert, did the 6 people who no longer live at that particular residence all put the same address? And that Yeah,
change of address.
and that would prove what you and I had basically talked about with outsourcing, because that would conclusively prove it. You had a lot of TDS people running around, and it's not even an organized effort. It was just taking advantage of what you knew people would do if you allowed them to do it. And
Yeah, you said, hey, by the way, the vault's open in every bank in the county, and the front door's unlocked, and the cops won't be around, and they're never going to come investigate. Some portion of people are gonna come in and take what's in the vault.
Just gonna do
in
it.
some counties they won't, in some counties they will, and that's why you see wild disparities between counties in the same state all across the country. And that has to be the focus. And we're getting decent election law reforms, and we've been behind the scenes helping to push things. But frankly, the biggest hurdle at getting the best reforms is that Donald Trump's too busy complaining about the New York Times. That's why I'm irritable about the subject, even though the Trump loyalists will now send me some more hate mail. But if you want to really troll me, you got to go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com, because that's the only place I'm guaranteed to read your troll.
Get it.
That was fantastic, Robert.
It's like you're going to have to pay
with that
to endure your
That is
trolling.
what's so great about locals too. And you're just not going to get a ton of them, although you do get them. Some people do pay
you
to
gotta
troll
pay
you,
to
and
troll
that's
me.
cool.
That's the beauty of it.
And
it's like, hey,
that's
if
great.
you're willing to pay a couple of bucks to troll me, oh, all right, I'll take your money and
I'll
read your
respond.
comment.
Yep.
That's right, and that's
I'll
exactly
endure it.
that is exactly how we see it. We're like, you know what? We'll engage. All right, you paid the $5. We'll engage. Why not? All right, so that was a perfect way to pitch it, guys. Don't forget to join over at Viva Barnes Law on Locals. vivabarneslaw.locals.com. Right? I got that. And Robert, what time can they catch you? You got the Wednesday, you got the Sunday.
So this Wednesday we'll be up at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The show Sidebar, interviewing a guest, and this one will be Doomcock, future ruler of Earth.
That sounds fantastic. Don't miss it, guys. And of course, you can catch me on Wednesday at 11 a.m. on Inside the Numbers. We'll be back. What are the odds? With fresh, completed, brand new, beautiful polling data on Monday at 2 p.m. So don't miss it. All right. All the best, folks. Robert, as always, man, it was great. We'll talk to you soon. All right.
Peace out. Thanks.